we have a good little crowd with us tonight. So hello, everyone. Welcome to Beers and Banter with the Jackson Hole Historical Society and Museum. I'm Morgan Jowen, the director of the museum. I know most of you, but not all of you. So thanks for tuning in to our virtual program tonight. We've had a bit of a lapse with our Beers and Banter programming, but really excited to be back at it for the winter season and at least bring you some programming virtually. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy the program tonight. We're really excited to get in one last Teton County Centennial program before we wrap up 2021. And today with us, we have a number of former elected officials. We have Sherry Daigle, Larry Jorgenson, Andy Schwartz, and Melissa Turley, who are our panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves once we get started, but basically the format of Beers and Banter is pretty informal. I'm going to moderate the beginning of the conversation where I have a number of questions to ask our panelists about their time as elected officials here in Teton County. And then we'll open it to the audience to ask your questions as well. And so when we go to that part, you're welcome to either raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. You can also throw questions into the chat. We'll be monitoring those and asking those either along the way and at the end as well. So that's the format for tonight. And before we get started with our panelists, I did just want to give a quick kind of history overview of Teton County's formation, which was created in 1921. And so we're 100 years of Teton County governing our beloved Jackson Hole. And so I just wanted to share some of those facts. But first, I wanted to share a different screen. Okay, so this is one of the many newspaper clippings about Teton County's creation. It was a controversial formation that kind of took place from 1921 to 1923 or 24. Jackson Hole was originally a part of Uinta County and then Lincoln County. Residents here were incredibly far from the county seat in Kemmer, as you can imagine, and really didn't have much access to county government. So in 1920, Wyoming State Representative W.C. Deloney submitted House Bill number 84 to create a new Jackson's Hole County. That was the original proposal. However, this area did not meet Wyoming state requirements where new counties were supposed to prove a land value of at least 5 million and a population of 3,000 residents or more. The proposed Jackson's Hole County at that time only had $2 million in land value and only 1,500 residents. So Deloney also submitted a bill that would adjust the requirements to allow for unique, quote, geographical conditions. So even though the bill was controversial, it did end up in legal battles for over a year. Governor Carey did sign the Teton County Validation Act on February 18th, 1921. And the only change he made was to change it from Jackson's Hole County to Teton County. 3 commissioners were then appointed: T.R. Wilson from Alta, W.P. Rednan from Kelly, and P.C. Hansen from Jackson. Local residents then got to vote on the location of the county seat in June 1921, and also to just give kind of a final approval that they wanted this new county. The county part of it kind of passed with flying colors. And 937 votes were cast in total, which is basically almost everyone who could vote in this area. And Jackson narrowly won as the county seat with 424 votes compared to Kelly's 402 votes. So that's the kind of headline you see on the screen now, is that controversial bit. Then in 1921, or kind of at the end of 1921, James Budge challenged the formation of Teton County. And in 1922, the Wyoming Supreme Court ruled that Teton County had been appropriately formed. Budge appealed, and the same decision was made in 1924. And so that's how we have Teton County today. And Teton County, the town of Jackson, a number of other partners, the Teton County Library, have been putting together a number of fun events and kind of informational things throughout the last year. And so this is one of the final things I think we'll be doing. But if you want to learn more about Teton County's history and kind of that formation, those formation years, there is currently an exhibit, a poster exhibit at the Home Ranch Lot Visitor Center across the street from the museum on North Cache. And so that has a lot more detailed information, more newspaper clippings and things like that. So make sure to check that out. So with that, I think I'm going to stop screen sharing and we'll get to the conversation part of the evening. So I always start Beers and Banter with the same question, asking our panelists to introduce themselves by answering, kind of introduce yourself and when and why did you come to Jackson and why did you choose to stay here? So Larry, do you want to start us off?
Sure.
First on my screen.
Came to Jackson in 1973. I had been practicing law in South Dakota after graduating from Wyoming Law School and wanted to get back to Wyoming. And came here and there was an opportunity, and my wife Paula and Michael and Chris, two little guys, we moved here that year. Why did we stay? Well, I've been in and out a couple of times. Was a federal prosecutor at one time. Was involved with some other law firms at different times, and this was always home. Came back. Kids have one son here with his wife and two granddaughters. Now, what bigger reason is there to stay than that?
Great. Thanks, Larry.
Yeah.
Sherry, we'll go to you next. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I was actually born here. My family is fairly well rooted in this valley. And Doc McLeod actually was the doctor that delivered me. And so I grew up here. My husband is from the East Coast. We met back there when I was living back there and working. And what makes us stay here is every time we would come back to visit family, I always said I missed my mountains. And growing up here, that's what brought me back was the mountains. We have two children that were raised here, one born here, but both were raised here from infancy. And they both, in fact, one is with the county right now and one is in school in Sheridan. So I, like Larry, what better reason to stay?
Continuing those Wyoming roots. That's great. Melissa.
Well, I'm a relative newcomer to Teton County compared to Sherry and Larry. But as Bob McLaren likes to say, I got here as fast as I could. So I moved here pretty much out of college. I'm celebrating my 22nd year in Teton County this year. And since I moved here, my brother and his wife also moved here. And then my parents moved here a few years ago. So Larry, you noticed Jim Turley on here, and that's my dad. So I've got all my family here with me now.
Cool.
There is a drive.
Oh, and why did I stay? The more important part, because like many of us who moved here out of college, I did think I would just be here for a couple of seasons. But I definitely stayed for this incredible community. And I still love looking at those Tetons every day. Every time I see them, well, when it's not gray, when I can see them, they still take my breath away.
Thanks, Melissa. For those listening in, we do have a fourth panelist, Andy Schwartz, who was logged in briefly, but was having some technical issues. So I think he's trying to log back in and hasn't gotten back into the the Zoom room yet, but I'll just keep an eye on that. And when he does, we'll have him introduce himself and jump in, but we'll just keep going, I think, with our questions then. So my next question, because we are talking to former elected officials and about our Teton County Centennial, is to share with us when you first became involved in local politics and why, and what was your first elected position and last elected position. And maybe they're the same, but that's a three-part question. Sorry to make it complicated, but who wants to jump in first? Sherry. Oh, Larry.
Sherry, Larry. Yeah. Whoever. Sherry, she talks a lot.
Okay, Larry.
And have any of you worked together?
Yeah.
I actually, Morgan, have served with all three of the previous commissioners. My first jump into politics, and I tell everybody this all the time, if you'd have told me in high school when I was here that I would have been running for election in Teton County, I would have laughed you right out of the county, because that was the last thing I wanted to do. When we moved back here in '93, Clerk Jolene Kuntz, who was a family friend, rang me up and said, I want you to come go to work for me. And at that time, I didn't have a job because we had just been back here, and I started work for her. And I wasn't there 3 months. And she said, I'm going to groom you up and you're going to be the next county clerk. And I, at then, pretty naive to the whole thing. Sure, what the heck, I'll just jump right in. And that is really the only elected position politically that I have ever held. I held it I was in the office for 26 years, 22 of those as county clerk. And I forget what your third part was. I apologize.
I think you've answered all of them. What was your first and last elected position?
Right on. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry.
Your turn, Larry.
All right. Well, let's see. I guess I'm the oldest in the group, and I'm having trouble remembering the questions, but I have a cheat sheet here. I became involved soon after coming in 1973. I had been involved with politics, and my family had for many years in South Dakota. My father, in fact, was a state treasurer, state auditor, 16 years at a local level. When I went back to practice law there after graduating from law school, I immediately became involved with South Dakota politics. I chaired a U.S. Senate campaign, and so when I came to Jackson, I had a natural affinity for politics, and still believe it's one of the more honorable callings, despite the difficulties of modern day service. But each person who serves, I believe, is fulfilling a very important obligation that we have to our locales and to our country. The first elected position that I sought, I guess, was the Teton County Conservation District. I was trying to remember when that was, and I haven't come up with the year, but it was quite a long time ago. And I just served one term. I was on the state board at that time too, served as chairman and came through things like that. And so I have a deep interest in conservation that was not fostered, but encouraged in that position. So that's about it. Oh, and then I did run for county commissioner. Interesting experience. My law partner looked at me and said, "What?" And I said, "Well, I feel like I need to do it, and I'm going to do it." We had a primary. Sherry, you might remember. I don't remember how many people were in it in the Republican primary, but it was a large number, and came through that all right and was able to get elected. So that's the story.
And how long did you serve, Larry?
4 years. Mhm.
Thanks. Melissa, do you want to jump in, and then we'll go to Andy?
Yeah, I was going to say, I see Andy's joined. I first ran for Jackson Town Council in 2006. I was inspired to run for council because there wasn't anyone like me on the town council or the county commission at the time. There were no women, and there was no one under 40 years old. I served on the town council for about 6 years, and then 7 years served on the county commission for about 3 more.
Thanks, Melissa. Representative Schwartz. Hi, Andy. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, hi, thank you for hosting this, and it's nice to see so many faces and names because I'm down in Cheyenne. I feel a little bit disconnected. So I grew up in a very political household near Washington, D.C., so politics has always been part of my life. But when I moved to Jackson, I was more about working and recreating and then raising a family. And I was a neighbor of Bob McLaurin, who was the town manager. And one day he gave me a piece of paper and said, sign this. And I said, okay, what is it? And it was to an application to be on the town planning commission. I think that was 1992. So I was a planning commissioner in the town, then the county. So that was 8 years. Then 12 years on the county commission with Larry, and overlapping with Melissa on the town council, and doing whatever Sherry told me to do. And for the last 8 years, I've been a state rep, and it's what I'm doing today.
Thank you. Bob McLaurin should maybe be on this call too. He is also a board member of the Historical Society and Museum. So he is also a through thread of this conversation. That's great. Awesome. Thank you all. Let's see. The next question I have for you are there any historical figures or events that have inspired and or influenced your career? I'm sure there may be many, but if there's one or two that rise to the top.
I'm happy to jump in, Morgan.
Great.
The issue that got me interested in running for elected office was workforce housing, and really wanting to give a voice to the young working people like me. But I think what really an inspiration for me as I ran is the fact that here we are in Wyoming, the equality state, where women first won the right to vote, where we elected the first female governor. And of course, as we know, here in Teton County, we had the first all-women town council. And as I said, at the time when I ran, there were no women in our local elected office of the town council and the county commission. There were women in elected office. Sherry Daigle was in elected office at the time, and others in the county elected offices, but none in the gang of 10 as it's referred to. So that certainly brought me inspiration and strength to make sure that, you know, we have diverse representation in our local elected government. And I'm glad to see that we have more diversity on those two boards today than we did at that time.
Thanks, Melissa. When we talk about the all-women town council at the Historical Society, we certainly like to kind of bookend that with 5 women were elected to town council in 1920, and then we did not have another female elected official until the 1980s in this area. So yeah, great. Who else? Inspirational figures or events from the past?
I'll jump in, and it's kind of an odd one. So when I was in my teens, Lyndon Johnson was hardly a person I had much admiration for. I was actually often in the streets demonstrating against Lyndon Johnson and the Vietnam War. But then as I got older, I've always read a lot of history. And I discovered Robert Caro and his multiple books about Lyndon Johnson. And not only are they wonderful books, but I developed an incredible admiration for his ability to navigate the political world and accomplish what often seemed to be impossible by building bridges and working hard. And that's kind of my motto now.
I'll jump in. Like you suggest, Morgan, lots of people. It's always about, you know, who you respect, who you look up to, and who touches you in some way, because we're all human beings and we have hearts and we have souls. And I think that leaders, particularly in one way or another, touch a lot of people. Mine would be kind of spread out. One in particular would be Ellen Simpson. And he and I are good friends. I was his chairman when he first ran. And and just through the years, I was able to be close enough to him to experience his wisdom and his, most of all, his kindness and how he related to people. Remembered names. There was nobody that he looked down on other than because of his height. And he's still a role model for me. Another person that, to pick up on what Andy said of working hard and setting example type things is Sandy Sheptride. I've admired her very much since becoming involved more locally. I've seen what she has always done in the way of leadership and commitment and working hard, being well organized and so on. And when I opted to run for county commission, she gave me a lot of good advice about different things. Looking back though, since this is kind of a historical thing, I think of names. I think Bob Shervin had an impact on me because he always talked straight. Didn't always agree with him, but he talked straight. Generous man, a leader. Tommy Watsabaugh. Oh, what a wonderful man. When I was in the Shrine Club, I just identified with him a lot. He led the fire department for so many years. There were a couple other that I kind of thought of. It isn't a popular name probably across in other parts of the state. It's popular with me because of the principles that she has, and that's Liz Cheney. Standing up with the barrage of criticism and opposition to her and her belief in the Constitution and in people is a real inspiration to me. That's about it.
Thanks, Larry. I'll make a quick plug for Sandy Sheptride too. She was a part of a panel in July for Beers Banter. We did have another county session as well. And that is recorded and available on the museum's YouTube page if anyone's interested in listening to Sandy along with Leslie Peterson and Hank Febbs. Fantastic. Sherry, inspirational people.
I think that I'm going to take a little different approach, sort of. Not really a historical figure, but kind of a person that helped really build this community. My mom, Virginia Blair, was one of the cornerstones of Jackson State Bank from back in the late 50s, mid to late 50s. Grew up with several presidents there, Bob Stewart being one of them, who was married to Jean Van Vleck Stewart. She was instrumental in loaning and helping to build this community financially. And she had a very strong work ethic. There were a lot of times where we didn't have mom around because she was at a bankers convention or they were running notes or whatever the case was. And that really instilled that hardworking ethic in me. And I do look up, she was my hero. Although we didn't get along very well at times, but she did, as most mothers and daughters do. She did do a lot for this community, and there are people on this meeting that probably can attest to that. And the other person politically that I really looked up to was Jolynn Kuntz. She started very young in the clerk's office, held this office for a long time, got pretty much ran the county more so than any other clerk. And she was the one that taught me the ropes and showed me how to assist the commissioners in the best possible way that I could, and still run an office outside of that. And so those would be the two figures that have really shaped my outlook on work and the county and such. So
That's great. Thanks, Sherry. I wonder, I bet your mom is probably included in, there's a great book called Sagebrush to Silver Dollars about the Jackson State Bank and how influential it was in the community. So.
Yeah, there's quite a few references to her in that book. So
great. Okay. Now it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your times in office. And my next question is, what are some of your proudest accomplishments during your term or terms in office? And even outside of your terms, what do you consider the biggest milestones in Teton County history? You have some of those ideas.
Well, I can start if you'd like. I'll make it clear. No, I have no accomplishments. Everything that I could lend my hand to as having been good resulted from people around me. County employees, the best kind of governmental employees I've ever been around. We're blessed in this community with that kind of quality of employees. There's one thing that in particular I'm very proud of, that again was not me, but was us. I was on the library board in the old log cabin. And I was chairman of the library board when we built the new library. I worked with some wonderful people. We brought that project in under budget, and we had a magnificent facility. Now it's been added on to, and some changes have been made and so on. But that at the time spoke well for this community and for this county as to standing up for the things that matter in life. And books at that time had a more prominent place on the shelf than the computers on the desk. But so that's one. I'm proud of our commission that I was on. Well, there's several things, and I don't want to go on and dominate the time, but little things. I can remember when Andy absolutely insisted that we spend over $1 million on the turf for soccer at the high school. Look at it now. We're replacing it. Scores and scores and scores of athletes enjoy it. But Andy was the plug that got that done. I'm proud of the Heritage Center, which I think I was a little bit of a plug for as chairman at that time, because we were having budget concerns and how did we afford it, but we all worked it out. I think that the Teton Science School, which came at that time, was a step in the right direction. Location, of course, raised some eyebrows, but as a school and what it is and what it represents for our people is outstanding. I could go on. There's a number of other things, but that's enough. Okay.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, it's probably pretty hard to boil down 4+ years of time in office here to just a few accomplishments. So thank you for joining.
Yeah.
Okay. Who else? Big accomplishments, things you remember.
Well, I forget a lot, but well, first of all, I would like to say and commend Larry, because I think the library project is one of the true gems of our community. And that little log cabin wasn't going to cut it any longer. And we wound up with something that's really wonderful. And Larry deserves a lot of credit for that. Thank you. For me, I started out as a planning commissioner and was involved in the 92 comp plan. And both Larry and Melissa were in office. Around 2005, I was convinced that comp plan was inadequate and nobody wanted to go back and do a new comp plan. I remember talking to Larry about this, and I was just pretty insistent. This is something we need to do. And one by one, I got the votes. And ultimately, the 2012 comp plan was such a huge improvement. And, planning can't fix everything and satisfy everyone. But what we wound up with, I think, is a really good document that it's a document that should be changed, that is designed so it can be changed to adapt to different needs and as we move into the future. But I'm very proud of that. I think it was well worth the blood and sweat and tears that we all shed on that one.
You, Ms. Morgan, and we could kind of jump in if we had other thoughts. I would mention with the revision of the comp plan and so on, which were steps forward at that time. There's two aspects, I think, of it, and forgive me for knowing which one is where, but the two things I think have influenced the direction of this community in our county more than any others. And there's two of them. One is whoever thought up the idea that we have to house 65% of our workforce puts an impossible, in my opinion, impossible burden on this community to try to meet that goal, and directs attention away from alternative means of transportation and so on. I was one of the crazies back, I guess, well, I don't know if Andy called me one, but back at that time of a Unirail or something that would begin to connect, and that type of thing. That's one. Number two is that I think that the quality of the town and so on has been in affordable housing, and the effort that we've as a community made there need to continue to consider was hamstrung from the very start by not some zoning or something in the comp plan and so on to put some of it out in the county. And that's all. But it can be.
I might jump in because my
Controversial.
comment to the comp plan as well. And I would say my proudest accomplishment was participating in that comp plan update from 2006 to 2012. Larry, I didn't dream it up, but I heavily supported the goal of housing 65% of our workforce. And that was based on the fact that was how much, well, partly based on the fact, at least, that was how much of our workforce we were housing at that point in time. And we realized it was a very ambitious goal to be able to maintain going forward, but we also recognize that the comp plan is a visionary document. And so we did want to set a lofty goal. And I think, if I look at the history of Teton County as it relates to how we live in this community today, really, I would give a lot of credit to those commissioners who enacted our very first comprehensive plan. And I poked around a little bit to try to find the date. My recollection says it was in the 70s. I don't know, Morgan, if you have that at your fingertips, or Andy. But I just think
I can say I was at the meetings.
you remember that. But you know, when you look around Teton County today, again, we just have so much to thank the folks that implemented that comp plan for their foresight. I know it was not easy. I know land use planning in Wyoming was not popular. It was not popular in all of Teton County, and yet you know, the view sheds that we've been able to protect the way that we have had more density in the town of Jackson and in Wilson and then down the road in Teton Village. You know, we have those folks to thank for approving that comp plan way back in the 70s.
Thanks, Melissa.
So, again, I'm going to take a little different direction. The county clerk's position is really, in my opinion, not political. We don't set policy and we don't make big decisions like that. But what we do as county clerks is we're also the chief election officer for the county. And one thing that happened during my tenure was the 2000 election and the debacle that happened in Florida. And I happened to be president of the state association at that time. And when the federal government came through with new legislation to try and divert that from happening again, the Help America Vote Act was passed in 2002, which required among many other things, a real-time statewide voter registration system. And Wyoming at that time did not have that. So I and 6 other clerks from across the state worked very hard with the Secretary of State's office, and we designed the WyoReg system, which is still in effect today. It is real time. It is the voter registration system that it's updated and cared for by each county clerk. However, it is a statewide thing, so separate counties can see what we're doing up here to keep from duplicate registrations, etc. Along with that came, we had to remove all punch card systems, and Teton County had been a punch card county just prior to my election, and we started with the optical scans. So those are 2 really big things that I think that I accomplished early on. And then about mid of my terms, we went to vote centers, which was Laramie County and Teton County were the only 2 counties in the state that allowed for those vote centers at that time, which gives all voters the chance to vote wherever you are, not necessarily where you live. You still have to vote in your same precinct and your ballot's predicated on that, and that's a whole nother story. So those 3 things I feel are the biggest accomplishments that I had during my tenure as county clerk.
And I've got to jump in and say, because I was a commissioner for 12 years and Sherry was the clerk, and she did a masterful job with elections. And it's not an easy thing to do. People take it for granted that when they show up at the poll and cast a ballot, it'll be counted. And they leave and they just assume that. Maybe not so much anymore, but Sherry did just a wonderful job. And I always admired your work on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was hard, but it was a task that I enjoyed. And I think that's why I was so good at it, is because I did enjoy it. And it was a challenge for me to make sure that it did all come out correctly. So thank you.
Complex, but so important. Thanks, Sherry. Okay, I'm gonna skip down to my last question for the group, which leads, I think, well into some of the first questions coming from the audience, which we'll pull from the chat in a second. But my last kind of big question is, what do you believe to be some of the biggest challenges we as a community face today? This is can of worms, certainly, but anyone wants to dive in. And remember, these are just your personal opinions on a historical society program.
Well, I'll do that, and then they can take shots at me. I've got a couple of thoughts. Several years ago, all of us, I think, Andy, you maybe remember this. We spoke out at the science school to, I think it was one of Andy and Jonathan Schechner's brainstorms. And I gave an address out there at that time and went through a lot of things as to the state of the county and et cetera, et cetera. But the big kind of one of the planning cliches at that time was tipping point. And I said at that time, excuse me, that I felt that the county and town were at a tipping point. We seemed to be having a difficult time then in identifying who we were and where we wanted to go. And I think that it's past the tipping point. I believe that electeds now in town and county have a much more difficult time of trying to govern as their roles should be because of the change that's in culture and in population and so on that have occurred. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. Whether it's true or not, it's how I feel. The other thing is, I think that I got to look at my note. The pressure that's been brought on our electeds, whatever their political affiliation, by special interests, and by special interest, I refer also to not-for-profits, of which, in my opinion, there are way too many of them in this county that drain money off of much more important nonprofit efforts than what they may be engaged in. The pressure, excuse me, on the town and county officials and the offices is extreme. If we continue like this, who's gonna want to serve? Some will, but civility still should reign. I can proudly say that in my 4 years as a county commissioner, I had one nasty letter in 4 years. I'd hate to be on there today. And I just think I wanted to throw that out, and because I'm an old guy now, and I don't have to worry about going down the road too far. So anyway, that's how I feel about where we're presently situated.
Thanks, Larry. Other comments on challenges we're facing today and in the future?
I see us facing many of the same challenges we've long faced. And we continue to face challenges with housing and transportation and protecting the environment locally and thinking more globally. So, and these are large, difficult, challenging problems that I'm not sure that we can expect to completely solve. I think we'll be working on these for many years more, and we have a variety of solutions. We have the opportunity to learn from other communities that have struggled with these challenges. And then our community has to decide what level of resources they're going to support. We did have the opportunity with a ballot measure recently to increase our sales tax to support housing and transportation, and the community didn't support that. But we continue to hear from loud voices in the community that those are the largest problems we face. So, I think we do need to have, elected leaders that are willing to continue working on these problems that are challenging problems, but also to put it back and really involve the community in meaningful ways to make sure that we're listening to all voices, we're engaging all of our community and not just responding to those sometimes what the loudest voices are. And really, I think that's the mark of a good leader is, to listen to people and help guide them in the direction that you hear the majority of people in a democracy like we have want to go. So, we've got hard work. It's always been hard to live here. And I see that we're going to continue challenging or dealing with these challenges.
I may just throw a couple of cents in and then Andy can finish up because I'm sure he has much wiser ideas than I do. But growing up here, I agree with you, Melissa. The problems were here in the 60s. They were here in the 50s. My mother grew up down in Star Valley and she came here right after she graduated from high school to go to work and commuted back and forth. Housing was the same. There wasn't much for housing here. Land values were low. There was a lot of open space, but nobody could afford to build. So the housing wasn't here either. Workforce, again, people were coming in from the outside communities to work and going home at nights. So it was just on a much smaller scale because the population was not what it is today. We're more of a transient community today across the world. And so a lot of people have been exposed to this area, its beauty, and they want to come here. They want to live here. They want all of the beauty. But I think, as Larry said, the culture, folks don't really want to work for it. They want it given to them. And I'm not sure how you change that. So there's your opening, Representative Schwartz. You can take it from here.
Thank you, Sherry.
I like your beard, Andy, by the way.
I beg your pardon.
Beard.
Oh,
Haven't seen
you can't have it, Larry. I'm sorry. I really agree with Sherry. I mean, the issues of housing and work and the nature of our economy have been pretty similar since, I didn't move here till the early 70s, mid 70s, but that's how it was then. And I know people said then, God, this community is just growing too fast and you just moved here, why don't you leave? And that's kind of always, the joke that if you ask somebody when was Jackson Hole at its best, it was the day they moved here. And that's always been true. I look at the chat questions and they're both related to growth. And I don't think controlling growth is something we can do. And it's not something you can do just today. I think it's more about managing growth, and it's a long-term process, and it involves transportation, it involves housing, it involves human services. I could go on, and I think it's just really critical that people don't give up and that we all keep working together to try and find solutions to the various, I don't want to call them problems even, they're just the issues we face, because there's always going to be issues. And it's just a question of trying to work together to make sure that the valley is a place that people want to live in. Because I'm looking at a lot of the names on this Zoom, and these are people who live here and love living here. Well, I'm actually in Cheyenne, but yeah, you know what I'm saying. And that's what, and there will be turnover and a lot of people will leave because they can't afford it or they don't like it anymore, but it's still a great place. And we just got to keep working to keep that.
Thanks, Andy.
Cheers to that, Andy. Not a beer drinker, but I'll cheers my bitters and soda.
Let's say, I hope everyone has their beverage of choice. Yeah, I don't know for the other panelists, if you're able to see the chat questions, they're both about growth and how, if anything, and what should be done about it. Basically, if anyone else has specific comments about growth in Teton County.
About growth?
Growth, yeah.
I guess I didn't see it.
I want to make a comment because I am in Cheyenne. And I know Bruce Houghton's heard me talk about this a lot. In a lot of ways, we forget we're part of a state, but we are. And it's interesting down here how they view Teton County, and everybody thinks they hate us. They don't hate us. We're just different, and sometimes different is uncomfortable. And the one thing I remind them, and this has not always been true, but the way funding for K-12 education works, essentially all the property tax in all the counties is pooled and distributed. So every child in Wyoming gets an equal education, which is really phenomenal. We're the only state that truly does that. And the wealthy counties contribute more. They're called recapture counties. And forever, Teton County was a poorer county. And it was counties like Campbell with the coal, or Converse with oil and gas. They were the recapture counties. Teton County is now a recapture county to the tune of $22 million a year. And that's a big deal. And we should be proud that, yeah, there's been a lot of growth, but we are now actually one of the economic drivers of the state. And that's a good thing.
I don't know if I would jump in at this point other than to say, how did we get from, first of all, I don't agree with Sherry or with Andy that the 70s and 80s were just like today. That's a stretch in my book. What we are today is an urbanized, gentrified community of a county and a town, with the town, and I've lived in the town for nearly 50 years, has been, as a living place, become terrible. Now, it's due to common problems that are part of what I indicated. We went past the tipping point. We're too late to shut the door on the barn. And I think it was wrong to direct that all growth be directed to the town of Jackson. I think that was a bad mistake. And those of us that live in Jackson are paying that price. The other thing I wanted to mention was that there's two events that I think had continued to have a tremendous significance to our people. And these aren't negative. These were the milestones I thought that I saw in the chat page or something. The milestones that I think of. One is the approval and building of the Four Seasons out at Teton Village. Magnificent building and led to a lot of beautiful things. Melissa's involved with that now. And as I say, it's not negative at this point. What it did was it began to set a different standard of development. And along came Three Creeks, the other one down south and so on. And a lot of things that were now of a higher level, of a grander level. that appealed to a whole different bunch of people. And along came Morningstar, which I was the only one on the commission to vote against. And that, I think, complicated Teton Village, the people that live along it and so on, to a degree that we have to find a different solution for. And now it's down to highways, whether more lanes and on as we kill animals right and left. I think those are two significant things that the leaders need to focus on, not as events themselves, but what was the result, because there's additional things being proposed that can accomplish the same detriments. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. We are getting a little short on time, and so I just want to invite audience members if there are any other questions. Give a minute, either type them into the chat or use another method like unmuting yourself or raising your hand.
I don't see many people.
Good people on. And if there are none, I have one last to wrap us up, which is, what are you excited for over the next decade? And what do we have to look forward to in the next 10 years here in Teton County? Maybe it's summiting the Grand for you personally. Anyone want to chime in?
I mean, I look forward to this continuing conversation about how we don't let the community slip away from us. And yeah, Larry and I can argue about the tipping point and things like that, but we are where we are, and we still have a community. I mean, I think what the Historical Society does is an indication of that, and we can't give up. No matter, it's just, we can't give up. And there will be new leaders and new faces and new issues. And I think we will not just survive, I think we will actually be one of the leaders, globally, in finding a way to, when, the greater yellow ecosystem. This is really what it's all about. It's not about Jackson. It's about doing what we can to ensure that the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is there for generations and generations. And I'm cautiously optimistic.
Sandy?
What have we got to look forward to? I'm an optimist. I think what's been developing in many respects is almost a miracle. The science and the high tech and so on that we have here, the innovative new small businesses, which are the heartbeat of not only the state, but the country. We've done well in that respect. We have to address, I sound a bit negative, perhaps I'm not. I'm an optimist about where Jackson's headed, and I think my granddaughters who live here are going to enjoy a very special place, just as I have. And but we've got some things to take care of, and it doesn't do any good to put a pie in the sky if we're not willing to cut the cake also. So that's where I'm at. But what a wonderful panel. I'm pleased that you would ask me to be part of this.
Thanks, Larry. Melissa, Sherry? Final comments?
Well, I certainly, I share Andy's optimism, and I think that we do have a place that people are passionate about, and that's something we can be sure that there are plenty of people in Jackson Hole working to make this a great place. Personally, I'm really excited that I hear Teton County is working to, or it's getting quite close to hiring a transportation coordinator who will help to implement the integrated transportation plan. And I look forward to seeing some new and innovative transportation solutions. I hope that includes a regional transportation planning organization. While I don't think it probably will include the monorail connecting Moose to Jackson to Teton Village, that I agree is visionary, Larry. But I don't know we're going to see that, but I do hope that we see high occupancy vehicle lanes on Highway 22. And I hope that we see that really start to swing the dial for folks in getting more people to ride transit and carpool and to reduce the traffic that we're seeing on Highway 22, especially in the summer months. So yeah, I look forward to, what new solutions come forward for our community and what kind of a town my son has as he's growing up for his future.
I would just like to echo the same thoughts. We've had issues come before us in the past. We've worked our ways through it, and I'm sure we will in the future. And I thank you for including me on this panel. And I look forward to retirement. So
You deserve it, Sherry.
thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you to our 4 panelists. That was a terrific conversation tonight. Thank you for all of our attendees who tuned in and listened tonight as well. It was a really nice session. I was recording it, and we will be editing the session and posting it on our YouTube page for folks who weren't able to join us tonight and want to listen to your stories about Teton County. And also, I just want to wrap up. I have to say this, and something Andy said reminded me of it, that we do have a special winter exhibit at the History Museum that opens December 15th. And it's kind of a sequel to our summer exhibit, which was about the local painter Archie Boyd Teeter. And it's called, the winter exhibit is entitled Teton Teeter, Creating Art and Community in Jackson Hole. So a little different. We didn't talk about the arts tonight, but we did talk about creating community and working hard for our community. So please visit us this winter.